My name is Victoria Ashford, though most people call me Vicky. I'm 64 years old, and 3 weeks ago my own son, Jeremy, made me sleep in his garage during what was supposed to be a family reunion weekend. He stood there in his pristine kitchen, designer coffee mug in hand, and said with that condescending tone I'd grown to recognize, "Mom, I'm sorry, but Natasha and I have converted your old room into her home office. The garage has a futon and a space heater. You'll be comfortable enough for 2 nights." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Jeremy didn't know as he handed me a moth-eaten blanket and pointed toward his 3-car garage was that 6 months earlier I had quietly purchased his $47,000 mortgage from Pinnacle Financial when he'd fallen behind on payments. The same sprawling colonial house in Willowbrook Estates where he was now relegating me to sleep among lawn equipment and storage boxes. I owned every single monthly payment on it. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me ask, where are you watching from today? And if this situation sounds familiar or hits close to home, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got something even more shocking saved just for you. You see, the irony of that moment wasn't lost on me as I stood in Jeremy's garage, looking at cobwebs in the corners and oil stains on the concrete floor. This wasn't just about family disrespect or poor hospitality. This was about a son who had completely forgotten where he came from, who his mother really was, and what she was capable of. Jeremy had built his entire identity around being the successful investment banker, the man who'd made it, despite his humble beginnings. He loved telling people at his fancy dinner parties about how he'd worked his way up from nothing, conveniently omitting the substantial financial support that had made his education and early career possible. The house itself was a monument to Jeremy's image of success. Every detail had been carefully curated by his wife Natasha, an interior designer who specialized in what she called elevated suburban luxury. The marble countertops, the imported Italian fixtures, the professionally landscaped gardens, everything screamed expensive taste and financial achievement. Jeremy took immense pride in giving tours to friends and colleagues, always mentioning the property value and the exclusive neighborhood association dues. But that night, as I arranged the thin cushions on the garage futon and listened to mice scurrying in the walls, I reflected on how we'd arrived at this point. It hadn't happened overnight. The disrespect had been building for years, growing more pronounced as Jeremy's career advanced and his lifestyle became more extravagant. Family dinners had become performances where Jeremy would dominate conversations with stories about his latest business deals, his networking events, and his ambitious plans for wealth accumulation. Natasha had been the perfect complement to Jeremy's transformation. She came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations and knew how to display it tastefully. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and her mother served on the boards of several prestigious charities. When Jeremy married her 5 years ago, it was like he'd been granted entry into a world he'd always envied from the outside. The wedding alone cost more than many people's annual salaries, and Jeremy had reveled in every expensive detail. The change in Jeremy's attitude toward me had been gradual but unmistakable. Where he once called regularly and visited often, our interactions became increasingly formal and infrequent. He stopped asking about my life, my interests, or my well-being, instead treating our conversations like obligatory check-ins with an elderly relative who required periodic attention. When I did visit, I noticed how he'd introduce me to his friends as my mom, with a slightly apologetic tone, as if my presence needed explanation or justification. Natasha had been more direct in her attitude adjustment. She'd begun making subtle comments about my clothing, my car, and my modest apartment in the older part of Millfield Heights. During family gatherings, she'd suggest that I might be more comfortable at a different restaurant when they wanted to try somewhere expensive, or she'd recommend that I save my money instead of buying gifts for their various celebrations. Her tone was always sweet and concerned, but the message was clear: I was financially inferior and should act accordingly. The culminating insult had come 6 months earlier when Jeremy announced that he and Natasha were struggling with their mortgage payment. His investment banking firm had downsized, and while he'd kept his job, his commission structure had changed significantly. They were facing the possibility of selling their dream house, a prospect that sent Natasha into what she described as complete emotional crisis. The house wasn't just their home, Jeremy explained. It was the foundation of their social status and professional credibility. During that conversation, Jeremy had actually asked me for financial help, though he'd phrased it as a temporary loan between family members. He needed $85,000 to catch up on missed payments and avoid foreclosure proceedings. When I'd hesitated, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I wanted to understand the full situation, Jeremy had become frustrated and dismissive. "I know it's a lot for someone in your situation, Mom," he'd said with barely concealed irritation. "If you can't help, just say so. We'll figure something else out." That phrase, "someone in your situation," had stung more than Jeremy probably realized. He'd made assumptions about my financial capabilities, based on my modest lifestyle and quiet demeanor, never bothering to ask about my actual resources or investment portfolio. He saw my small apartment, my practical car, and my simple clothing, and concluded that his mother was just another fixed-income retiree struggling to make ends meet. What Jeremy didn't know was that his mother had been running a successful financial consulting business for over 2 decades, helping small business owners and professionals manage their investments and plan for retirement. I'd built a substantial portfolio through careful investments, strategic real estate purchases, and a lifetime of living below my means while earning above them. The modest lifestyle I maintained wasn't due to financial limitation. It was a deliberate choice based on values Jeremy had apparently forgotten. So when Jeremy dismissed my ability to help and instead turned to more reliable family members, namely Natasha's wealthy parents, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of offering him the loan he'd requested, I contacted Pinnacle Financial directly and arranged to purchase his entire mortgage. The transaction was complex but perfectly legal, involving a network of financial professionals who specialized in distressed debt acquisition. Now, 3 weeks later, as I lay on that uncomfortable futon in Jeremy's garage, surrounded by the trappings of a lifestyle he could no longer actually afford, I knew the time for revelation was approaching. Tomorrow would bring a conversation that would fundamentally alter our family dynamics and force Jeremy to confront some uncomfortable truths about respect, assumption, and the difference between appearing successful and actually being secure. The irony was perfect, and the justice was about to be served. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Growing up in the industrial town of Riverside Falls during the 1960s, I learned early that financial security wasn't about what you displayed. It was about what you saved when nobody was watching. My father, Harold Kemp, worked as a machinist at Riverside Steelworks for 37 years, punching the same time clock every morning at 6:47 a.m. My mother, Dorothy, took in sewing from the wealthy families who lived in the hills above our small row house on Elm Creek Road. We lived in a narrow 2-story house with creaky wooden floors and windows that rattled when freight trains passed behind our backyard. Our furniture came from estate sales and church rummage events, and my school clothes were either hand-me-downs from my older cousin Bethany, or carefully altered pieces my mother created from fabric remnants she bought by the pound from the textile mill. Nobody in our blue-collar neighborhood would have guessed that my father was methodically accumulating what would eventually become a substantial investment portfolio. Every Friday after cashing his paycheck at First National Bank of Riverside Falls, he would deposit exactly 40% into a separate savings account that he never touched. He'd learned this discipline during his service in the Korean War, where he'd witnessed too many soldiers spend their entire pay on temporary pleasures, leaving nothing for their uncertain future. Victoria, he'd tell me while we sat at our scratched Formica kitchen table, reviewing the newspaper's financial section together, rich people want you to know they have money. Wealthy people don't need you to know anything. He'd circle stock prices with a stubby pencil, explaining how companies that made practical products, steel, concrete, basic machinery would always have customers, while flashy businesses often disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived. My father's investment strategy was remarkably simple: buy shares in companies that made things people couldn't live without, hold those investments for decades, and reinvest every dividend payment back into more shares. He never discussed his growing portfolio with neighbors, never bragged about successful stock picks, and certainly never adjusted our modest lifestyle to reflect his increasing net worth. By the time I graduated from Riverside Falls High School in 1977, my father's disciplined approach had quietly accumulated nearly $300,000 in investments, a fortune by our neighborhood standards, but invisible to anyone who judged wealth by appearances. Our house still had the same worn carpeting, our car was still a practical sedan purchased used, and our family vacations still consisted of camping trips to state parks rather than expensive resort destinations. The lesson my father taught me wasn't just about money, it was about character and the difference between needing validation and having genuine security. People who spend money to impress others, he'd say while reviewing our monthly budget, are usually trying to convince themselves as much as anyone else. But when you know you're secure, you don't need anyone else's approval or admiration. My mother reinforced these values through her own quiet approach to financial management. The sewing work she did for wealthy clients gave her insight into how the truly affluent lived versus how people pretended to live. She'd come home from alterations appointments in the wealthy Hillcrest district with stories about women who owned dozens of expensive dresses, but couldn't afford to have them properly fitted, or families who lived in mansions but ate dinner off paper plates because they'd spent their furniture budget on maintaining appearances. Real wealth, my mother would explain while teaching me to sew straight seams on her old Singer machine, gives you choices. Fake wealth gives you debt and anxiety. She'd seen too many of her clients stress about payments on luxury items they couldn't actually afford, maintaining lifestyles that required constant financial juggling and social performance. When I enrolled at Riverside Community College in 1978 to study business administration, my parents paid my tuition from their savings without taking loans or making dramatic sacrifices. They'd planned for my education the same way they planned for everything else, by saving consistently and spending thoughtfully. While my classmates worried about student debt and part-time job schedules, I could focus entirely on my studies, though I worked summers at my father's steel plant to understand the value of physical labor and regular employment. My business courses confirmed what my parents had taught me through example. Sustainable wealth came from consistent saving, smart investing, and living below your means regardless of your income level. My professors emphasized cash flow management, long-term planning, and the importance of building multiple income streams rather than depending on single sources of financial security. After graduating in 1981, I took a position as a bookkeeper at Riverside Financial Services, a small firm that helped local business owners manage their accounting and tax preparation. The work was steady and educational, giving me insight into how different types of businesses generated profit and managed expenses. I learned to recognize the difference between companies that were genuinely successful and those that merely appeared prosperous through creative accounting or unsustainable spending patterns. Within 3 years, I'd saved enough money to purchase a small duplex in the Riverside Falls Historic District. The property needed renovation work, but the bones were solid and the location was stable. I lived in one unit and rented the other, using the rental income to accelerate my mortgage payments while building equity and appreciating real estate. My parents approved of this strategy, recognizing it as an extension of their own philosophy about making money work efficiently rather than just accumulating possessions. When I met Thomas Ashford in 1984 at a community volunteer event for Riverside Falls Public Library, I was immediately drawn to his similar approach to life and money. Thomas worked as an electrical contractor, running a small business that focused on reliable service rather than flashy marketing or premium pricing. He drove a practical truck, lived in a modest apartment, and saved methodically for future expansion of his business operation. Our courtship was built on shared values about work, money, and community involvement. We both believed in contributing to local organizations, helping neighbors when they needed assistance, and building security through consistent effort rather than hoping for dramatic windfalls or shortcuts. When we married in 1986, we combined our resources and continued living modestly while our savings and investments grew steadily. Jeremy was born in 1988, and from his earliest years, Thomas and I were determined to teach him the same values our parents had instilled in. We wanted him to understand that real security came from character, consistency, and smart financial decisions, rather than from impressing others or accumulating status symbols. We thought we'd succeeded in passing down these lessons, but somewhere along Jeremy's journey to adulthood, those foundations had apparently shifted toward different priorities. Looking back now, lying on that uncomfortable futon in Jeremy's garage, I wondered where we'd gone wrong in Jeremy's financial education, and how the son who'd grown up understanding the difference between wealth and appearances had become so focused on image over substance. When Jeremy was 3 years old, Thomas and I made the decision to purchase a larger home in the Meadowbrook section of Riverside Falls, a quiet neighborhood of 1950s ranch houses with established trees and stable family. The house we chose was a modest 3-bedroom brick ranch, with a single-car garage and a fenced backyard. Nothing fancy, but solid and well-maintained. Our mortgage payment was manageable on Thomas's contractor income, leaving plenty of room for savings and Jeremy's future educational expenses. Our life in Meadowbrook followed a comfortable rhythm that reflected our shared values about family, work, and community involvement. Thomas left for job sites every morning at 7 a.m., his work truck loaded with tools and supplies for residential electrical projects throughout the county. I had transitioned from bookkeeping to financial consulting, working from a small office I'd set up in our basement, helping local business owners navigate tax planning and investment strategies. Jeremy's childhood was filled with the kind of experiences Thomas and I believed would build character and perspective. Summer mornings often found him in Thomas's workshop, learning to use basic tools and understanding how things were built and repaired. Thomas believed that hands-on skills were just as important as academic knowledge, and he wanted Jeremy to appreciate the value of physical work and practical problem solving. Our family dinners were sacred time, held every evening at 6 p.m. around our kitchen table with no television or distraction. Thomas would share stories from his workday, challenging electrical problems he'd solved, interesting customers he'd met, or new techniques he'd learned from other contractors. I'd discuss my consulting clients, explaining in age-appropriate terms how different businesses operated, and what made some succeed while others struggled. Jeremy was naturally curious about money and business, asking thoughtful questions about why some people seemed to have more than others, and how families made decisions about spending and saving. Thomas and I answered honestly, explaining that financial security came from earning more than you spent, investing the difference wisely, and making choices based on long-term thinking rather than immediate desires. Weekends in our household were a balance of work and family time. Saturday mornings, Thomas would often take Jeremy along to job sites where clients didn't mind having a well-behaved child observe electrical work. Jeremy learned to hand tools to his father, organize supply boxes, and understand the satisfaction that came from completing projects correctly and safely. These experiences taught him respect for skilled trades and the people who performed them. I would spend Saturday afternoons with Jeremy at the Riverside Falls Public Library, where we'd explore books about science, history, and biography. Jeremy was particularly drawn to stories about inventors and entrepreneurs who'd started with modest beginnings and built successful enterprises through persistence and innovation. We'd check out armloads of books and spend Sunday afternoons reading together on our living room couch. Our social circle in Meadowbrook consisted of neighbors and friends who shared similar values about family and community involvement. The Hendersons next door were both teachers at the local elementary school. Across the street, the Kowalski family ran a small plumbing business. 2 houses down, retired couple Frank and Eleanor Brennan had raised 4 children and were active volunteers at various community organizations. These relationships provided Jeremy with examples of different ways to build successful, meaningful lives without focusing on wealth accumulation or status competition. He saw the Hendersons' dedication to education and their students' success, the Kowalskis' pride in their family business and reputation for quality work, and the Brennans' satisfaction in their decades of community service and family achievement. Family traditions in our household were simple but consistent. Every Friday night was pizza night, with homemade pizza prepared together in our kitchen, while we discussed plans for the upcoming weekend. Sunday mornings involved church services at Riverside Community Fellowship,
followed by lunch at Miller's Diner, where Jeremy would order the same chocolate chip pancakes week after week. Summer vacations were camping trips to state parks within driving distance, where we'd spend a week hiking, fishing, and playing card games in our modest travel trailer. Thomas would teach Jeremy outdoor skills like setting up camp, building safe fires, and reading basic math. These trips were inexpensive but provided rich family experiences and taught Jeremy to find entertainment and satisfaction in simple pleasures. Christmas celebrations reflected our approach to thoughtful rather than extravagant gifts. Jeremy received gifts that encouraged learning, creativity, or skill development: books, building sets, art supplies, or sporting equipment. We emphasized experiences over possessions, focusing on family time and traditions, rather than expensive presents that would quickly lose their appeal. Thomas's electrical contracting business grew steadily during Jeremy's elementary school years, not through aggressive marketing or price competition, but through reputation for quality work and reliable service. Thomas hired 2 additional electricians and expanded into commercial projects, but he maintained the same modest lifestyle and conservative business practices that had brought initial success. My financial consulting practice also expanded during this period, as word spread about my ability to help small business owners improve their profitability and plan for growth. I specialized in working with family-owned businesses, understanding their unique challenges of balancing family dynamics with business decisions. My clients appreciated my practical approach and my ability to explain complex financial concepts in straightforward terms. By the time Jeremy started middle school, our household income had increased significantly, but our lifestyle remained essentially unchanged. We drove reliable used cars, shopped at practical stores, and continued living in the same Meadowbrook ranch house. The additional income went toward increased savings, college fund contributions, and strategic investments in mutual funds and real estate.
Jeremy excelled academically throughout elementary and middle school, showing particular aptitude for mathematics and science. His teachers consistently praised his work ethic, respectful behavior, and willingness to help struggling classmates. Thomas and I were proud of his academic achievements, but we were equally pleased with his character development and the values he seemed to be absorbing. During Jeremy's 8th grade year, we faced our first significant test of family financial priorities, when Thomas was offered an opportunity to bid on a major commercial electrical project that would require substantial equipment investment and additional staff hiring. The potential profit was considerable, but the risk was also significant. Success could dramatically increase our business income, but failure could jeopardize our financial security. Thomas and I spent weeks analyzing the opportunity, discussing the financial implications and weighing the potential benefits against the risks. We included Jeremy in these conversations, explaining how business decisions required careful evaluation of multiple factors and long-term thinking, rather than just immediate profit potential. Ultimately, Thomas decided to pursue the project, but with conservative financial planning that protected our core security, even if the venture failed. We used accumulated savings rather than loans to purchase necessary equipment, hired experienced electricians with proven track records, and structured the contract to minimize our exposure to potential losses. The project succeeded beyond our expectations, establishing Thomas's company as a respected commercial electrical contractor and opening doors to similar opportunities. However, we maintained our commitment to modest living and consistent saving, treating the increased income as an opportunity to build greater security rather than to upgrade our lifestyle dramatically. Jeremy observed all of this with interest and apparent approval, seeming to understand that our family's approach to money and success was different from what he saw in popular culture or among some of his peers. He expressed pride in his father's work and business success, and he showed genuine interest in learning about financial planning and investment strategies. Looking back now, those middle school years represented the height of our family harmony and shared value. Jeremy seemed to embrace the principles Thomas and I had tried to model, and we felt confident that we'd successfully transmitted our beliefs about character, work ethic, and financial responsibility to the next generation. The first crack in our family foundation appeared during Jeremy's sophomore year at Riverside Falls High School, though at the time it seemed like normal teenage development rather than a fundamental shift in value. Jeremy had always been academically gifted, but during his 15th year, his focus intensified in ways that initially made Thomas and me proud. He began staying after school for advanced mathematics tutoring, joined the debate team, and started talking about attending prestigious universities that we'd never seriously considered within our reach. Jeremy's guidance counselor, Miss Patricia Whitmore, called us in for a conference that October to discuss his exceptional test scores and academic potential. She explained that Jeremy was performing at levels that made him competitive for admission to elite universities, provided he continued his current trajectory and participated in appropriate extracurricular activities. The conversation was exciting but also intimidating, as Ms. Whitmore outlined the costs and requirements associated with top-tier college preparation. Jeremy has the intellectual capacity for any program he chooses, Mrs. Whitmore explained during our meeting in her small office, overlooking the school parking lot. But students competing for admission to schools like Whitman University or Thornfield College need more than just excellent grades. They need leadership experience, community service, standardized test preparation, and often expensive summer enrichment programs. Thomas and I listened carefully as she described a world of academic competition that was entirely foreign to our experience. Neither of us had attended four-year universities, and our understanding of higher education was limited to the practical business courses I'd completed at Riverside Community College. The idea that high school students needed professional test preparation and resume-building activities seemed overwhelming and unnecessarily complicated. Jeremy, however, absorbed every detail of Mrs. Whitmore's presentation with obvious enthusiasm. He asked detailed questions about application requirements, scholarship opportunities, and the differences between various prestigious programs. His excitement was infectious, and Thomas and I found ourselves caught up in his ambitions, despite our concerns about the costs and complexity involved. During the drive home from that conference, Jeremy's conversation revealed how much his thinking had already begun to shift. He talked about networking opportunities and career positioning in ways that sounded sophisticated but also strangely calculating for a 15-year-old. He'd researched starting salaries for graduates of different universities and had specific ideas about the lifestyle he wanted to achieve through his education and career choices. "Dad, your electrical business is successful, but it's limited by geography and the local market," Jeremy explained from the back seat of our practical sedan. "If I go to Whitman University and major in finance or economics, I could work anywhere in the country and earn more in my first year than most people make in 5 years. It's about leveraging education for maximum financial return." Thomas glanced at me with an expression that mixed pride with concern. Jeremy's analytical thinking was impressive, but his focus on financial returns and lifestyle upgrades represented a departure from the values we'd tried to instill. Thomas had always taken pride in his skilled trade and the satisfaction of solving complex electrical problems. The idea that Jeremy viewed his father's work as limited was troubling, even if it wasn't intentionally disrespectful. Over the following months, Jeremy's behavior began reflecting his new academic ambitions in ways that gradually created distance between him and our family's established routine. He started declining Thomas's weekend invitations to job sites, explaining that he needed to focus on SAT preparation and college application activity. Family dinners became less conversational as Jeremy would arrive at the table with academic materials and speak primarily about his school projects and college research. The changes weren't dramatic enough to cause immediate conflict, but they represented a subtle shift in Jeremy's priorities and self-perception. He began expressing impatience with our modest lifestyle and our satisfaction with local community involvement. During discussions about family activities or neighborhood events, Jeremy would make comments about better use of time or more productive ways to spend weekends. Jeremy's junior year brought the introduction of Bradford Academy, a private preparatory school located in the affluent suburb of Crestwood Hills, about 40 minutes from Riverside Falls. Several of Jeremy's most academically gifted classmates had transferred to Bradford for their final 2 years of high school, seeking the enhanced college preparation and networking opportunities that the school offered to students from wealthy families. The Bradford Academy recruitment presentation we attended that spring was unlike anything Thomas and I had experienced in our educational backgrounds. The school's admissions director, Dr. Harrison Pemberton, gave a polished presentation about developing future leaders and creating pathways to elite institutions. He showed statistics about college admissions rates, average SAT scores, and the prestigious universities that regularly accepted Bradford graduates. At Bradford Academy, Dr. Pemberton explained to the audience of prospective parents gathered in an elegant conference room, "We don't just prepare students for college admission, we prepare them for the kind of success that shapes industries and influences society. Our graduates become investment bankers, corporate executives, policymakers, and entrepreneurs who understand how to navigate elite professional networks." The annual tuition at Bradford Academy was $35,000 more than many families in Riverside Falls earned in an entire year. Additionally, students were expected to participate in expensive extracurricular activities, international study programs, and summer enrichment experiences that could easily cost another $50,000. For most families in our community, Bradford Academy was simply beyond financial consideration. Jeremy, however, had researched the school extensively and had convinced himself that attending Bradford was essential for his college and career goals. He'd identified specific programs and opportunities that weren't available at Riverside Falls High School, and he'd connected with current Bradford students through online forums who had shared their experiences and outcomes. "Mom, Dad, this isn't just about high school," Jeremy argued during a family discussion about the Bradford opportunity. "This is about positioning myself for the kind of success that will affect the rest of my life. The networking alone is worth the investment." Bradford graduates don't just go to good colleges, they go to the best colleges, and then they get jobs at the best companies. Thomas and I found ourselves in an uncomfortable position. We had the financial resources to afford Bradford Academy's tuition and expenses, but doing so would require revealing the extent of our savings and investments. Jeremy's request forced us to confront the contradiction between our modest lifestyle and our actual financial capability. More troubling was Jeremy's assumption that our hesitation was due to financial limitation rather than philosophical disagreement with the school's approach to education and social positioning. He began making comments about sacrificing for my future and investing in long-term family success that suggested he viewed our financial caution as short-sighted rather than principled. The Bradford Academy question also introduced Jeremy to families whose approach to wealth and lifestyle was dramatically different from ours. During campus visits and information sessions, he met parents who drove luxury vehicles, wore expensive clothing, and discussed vacation homes and private club memberships as routine aspects of their lives. Jeremy observed these interactions with obvious fascination and began making comparisons between their lifestyle choices and our more modest approach. "The Blackwell family drives a Mercedes and they're sending both their sons to Bradford," Jeremy mentioned during one of our family discussions. "Mr. Blackwell told me that he considers education the best investment a family can make, and he's willing to spend whatever it takes to give his children every possible advantage." He said that successful families understand the importance of positioning for the future. Jeremy's exposure to these attitudes began influencing his perspective on our family's financial priorities and lifestyle choices. He started questioning why we drove practical cars when we could afford newer models, why we lived in our modest Meadowbrook house when we could move to a more prestigious neighborhood, and why we emphasized saving money rather than spending it on experiences and opportunities that might enhance our social status. The spring of Jeremy's junior year became a turning point in our family dynamics, though we didn't fully recognize it at the time. Jeremy's increasing focus on prestige, networking, and social positioning represented a fundamental departure from the values Thomas and I had tried to model throughout his childhood. What we interpreted as normal teenage ambition was actually the beginning of a transformation that would eventually challenge everything we thought we'd taught him about character, priorities, and the relationship between wealth and happiness. By the end of that school year, Jeremy had convinced us to send him to Bradford Academy for his senior year, though the decision required lengthy discussions about family values and the importance of staying grounded regardless of educational environment. We agreed to the expense, hoping that the academic opportunities would benefit Jeremy's future, while trusting that his fundamental character would remain unchanged by exposure to a more privileged social environment. Jeremy's senior year at Bradford Academy exceeded our worst fears about how exposure to wealth and privilege might affect his character. Within weeks of starting classes,
He began requesting what he called lifestyle adjustments to better fit in with his new peer group. His first demand was for a different car, claiming that arriving at school in our family's practical Honda Civic was embarrassing and undermining his social credibility. "Mom, you don't understand the dynamics at Bradford," Jeremy explained during a tense family dinner in October. "These aren't regular high school students, their families own businesses, serve on corporate boards, and have connections that could affect my entire future. When I show up in a 10-year-old Honda while my classmates drive BMWs and Audis, it sends a message about our family's priorities and financial position." Thomas set down his fork and looked directly at Jeremy. "What message do you think it sends? That we don't understand how important image is for success," Jeremy replied without hesitation. "That we're more concerned with saving money than with positioning ourselves for opportunities." Tyler Worthington's father told him that in business, perception often matters more than reality. People make assumptions based on what they see, and those assumptions affect how they treat you. The conversation that followed revealed how dramatically Jeremy's thinking had shifted during just 2 months at Bradford Academy. He spoke about personal branding and social capital with the confidence of someone who'd discovered fundamental truths about success. His classmates' families had apparently shared their philosophies about wealth display and strategic spending, convincing Jeremy that our modest lifestyle was actually hindering his potential rather than building his character. By Thanksgiving, Jeremy had compiled a detailed presentation about his college application strategy, complete with projected costs and required investments. His research was thorough and impressive, but the financial expectations were staggering. Jeremy had identified 5 target universities, all with annual costs exceeding $70,000 when including tuition, room, board, and what he called necessary social expenses. "Dad, I know this seems expensive, but we need to think about return on investment," Jeremy explained while spreading his research across our dining room table. "Whitman University graduates earn an average starting salary of $120. Thornfield College has placement rates above 90% for consulting firms and financial services. These aren't just educational expenses, they're investments in earning potential that will pay dividends." Thomas and I listened as Jeremy outlined his expectations for college funding, which included not only tuition and standard expenses, but also fraternity membership, spring break trips, summer internship programs in expensive cities, and what he called professional wardrobe development. His calculations suggested that his 4-year college experience would cost approximately $400,000, not including graduate school, which he considered essential for his career objective. The most troubling aspect of Jeremy's presentation wasn't the financial expectations. We could afford the costs he'd outlined. What concerned us was his assumption that we should be grateful for the opportunity to fund his transformation into someone who bore little resemblance to the son we'd raised. Jeremy spoke about his future success as if it would somehow vindicate our investment rather than fulfill his own potential and ambition. "Once I'm established in my career, I'll be able to pay back everything you invest in my education," Jeremy promised with the earnestness of someone who believed he was offering generous terms. "But more importantly, I'll be positioned to take care of you in your retirement. Wouldn't you rather have a son who can afford to buy you a nice house in a good neighborhood than one who's limited by lack of proper education and network?" Thomas and I exchanged glances across the table, both recognizing that Jeremy had somehow concluded that our current life was inadequate and required his future rescue. His offer to take care of us in retirement suggested that he viewed our modest lifestyle as evidence of financial struggle rather than deliberate choice. The idea that we might already be financially secure and satisfied with our circumstances seemed incomprehensible to him. Jeremy's Christmas break provided additional insights into how completely his values had shifted during his time at Bradford Academy. He returned home with stories about his classmates' holiday plans, ski trips to European resorts, family vacations to Caribbean islands, and New Year's celebrations in major metropolitan cities. Our traditional family Christmas with homemade gifts and local church activities seemed to disappoint him in ways that he tried to hide but couldn't completely disguise. The Ashworth family is spending Christmas week at their ski lodge in Vale, Jeremy mentioned while we decorated our modest Christmas tree with ornaments collected over 20 years of marriage. Cameron Ashworth invited me to join them, but I explained that our family has different traditions. He seemed confused about why anyone would choose to stay home for Christmas when they could travel somewhere exciting. Jeremy's tone suggested that he was beginning to share Cameron's confusion about our choices. Throughout his winter break, he made subtle comments about our house, our furniture, and our entertainment options that revealed his growing dissatisfaction with what he now perceived as our limited lifestyle. He'd begun viewing our family traditions through the lens of his Bradford Academy experiences, finding them quaint at best and embarrassing at worst. The spring semester brought Jeremy's college acceptance letters and the beginning of serious discussions about his educational finance. Jeremy had been accepted to 4 of his 5 target universities, including Whitman University, his first choice. The acceptance letter came with a financial aid package that covered approximately 30% of the total costs, leaving us responsible for nearly $50,000. "This is it, Mom and Dad," Jeremy announced when the Whitman acceptance arrived. "This is the opportunity that's going to change everything for our family." Whitman University doesn't just provide education, it provides access to networks and opportunities that money can't buy. The alumni connections alone are worth the investment. Jeremy had already researched housing options at Whitman, identifying the most prestigious dormitory and planning to request a room with other students from influential families. He'd also investigated the most exclusive social organizations on campus, mapping out a 4-year strategy for building what he called strategic relationships with classmates whose families owned major businesses or held significant political positions. "You have to understand," Jeremy continued, his excitement evident as he outlined his plans. "Success at Whitman isn't just about academic performance, it's about positioning yourself within the social and professional networks that create opportunities after graduation. The students I room with, the organizations I join, the professors I connect with, all of these relationships could influence my career trajectory for decades." Thomas and I found ourselves in increasingly uncomfortable conversations about Jeremy's college plans and our role in funding his social and professional ambition. Jeremy's requests had expanded beyond educational expenses to include what he considered essential investments in his future networking and social position. He wanted funding for expensive clothing, high-end electronics, restaurant meals with influential classmates, and travel opportunities that would enhance his cultural sophistication. "Dad, I know you've worked hard to build your electrical business, but my career is going to operate on a completely different level," Jeremy explained during one particularly painful family discussion. "I'm going to be making decisions that affect millions of dollars and working with people who control major corporations. The investment you make in my education now will position our family for the kind of success that goes beyond anything we've experienced before." Jeremy's confidence in his future success was absolute, but his casual dismissal of Thomas's career achievements and our family's current lifestyle revealed how thoroughly he'd absorbed Bradford Academy's messages about status and hierarchy. He spoke about our modest life as if it were a problem to be solved rather than a deliberate choice that had provided stability, security, and satisfaction for our family. The final straw came during Jeremy's graduation week at Bradford Academy, when we attended a reception for parents and students at the elegant Crestwood Hills Country Club. Jeremy spent the evening introducing us to his classmates' parents while carefully managing the conversation to avoid detailed discussions about Thomas's work or our family background. His behavior suggested that he was embarrassed by our modest appearance and uncertain how to position us within the social hierarchy that dominated Bradford Academy relationships. During the drive home from that reception, Thomas and I realized that our son had become someone we barely recognized. His transformation from the curious, respectful child we'd raised into someone who viewed our family life as inadequate and limiting was complete. Jeremy's excitement about college represented not just educational opportunity, but escape from what he now considered the constraints of our middle-class values and lifestyle choices. Jeremy's 4 years at Whitman University transformed him into someone we could barely recognize during his increasingly rare visits home. His phone calls became infrequent updates about academic achievements, internship opportunities, and social events that sounded more like business networking sessions than college experience. When he did visit Riverside Falls, usually for major holidays, he seemed restless and uncomfortable in our modest Meadowbrook home, as if he'd outgrown not just his childhood bedroom but our entire way of life. During his sophomore year, Jeremy began dating Natasha Pemberton, whose father happened to be Dr. Harrison Pemberton, the same Bradford Academy admissions director who had first introduced us to the world of elite education. Natasha was pursuing a degree in interior design at Whitman, but her real education seemed to focus on social positioning and lifestyle management. She came from a family that owned a chain of luxury furniture stores throughout New England, and her understanding of wealth was based on display, acquisition, and social signaling.
Jeremy's descriptions of Natasha during his phone calls home revealed how completely he'd embraced the values of conspicuous consumption and status competition. She has incredible taste, he'd tell us enthusiastically. Her family's Connecticut estate has been featured in Architectural Digest twice. Her mother serves on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Dating Natasha isn't just about personal compatibility, it's about positioning myself within networks that could influence my entire career trajectory. Thomas and I listened to these conversations with growing concern. Not about Natasha personally, we hadn't met her yet, but about Jeremy's transactional approach to relationships, and his apparent belief that a person's value was determined by their family's wealth and social connections. The son who had once helped his father organize tools and enjoyed library visits with his mother, now spoke about human relationships as strategic assets to be acquired and leveraged. When Jeremy finally brought Natasha home for Christmas during his junior year, the visit provided uncomfortable insights into how completely his priorities had shifted. Natasha was polite and well-mannered, but her discomfort with our modest lifestyle was obvious despite her attempts to be gracious. She complimented our home's cozy charm and our neighborhood's authentic character in ways that clearly marked both as quaint but limited. Jeremy has told me so much about his childhood here, Natasha said during Christmas dinner, looking around our familiar dining room with what appeared to be anthropological curiosity. It must have been wonderful growing up in such a grounded environment. My family moved so much when I was young between the Connecticut house, the Manhattan apartment, and the summer place in the Hamptons, that I sometimes envied children who had more stable traditional upbringings. Her comments were technically complimentary, but the subtext was clear. Our stable traditional lifestyle represented a limitation that she was glad to have avoided. Jeremy nodded along with her observations, apparently agreeing that his childhood had been grounded in ways that implied constraint rather than strength. During that Christmas visit, Natasha made several suggestions about home improvements that revealed her complete inability to understand our intentional modest lifestyle. She recommended updating our kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, replacing our comfortable living room furniture with pieces that would better reflect your family's success, and landscaping our backyard to create entertaining spaces appropriate for Jeremy's professional development. "I hope you don't mind my suggestions," Natasha said to me while we cleaned dishes after Christmas dinner. "I just see so much potential in your home. With some strategic investments, you could create a space that really showcases your family's achievement." Jeremy is going to be very successful, and it's important that his family environment reflects that trajectory. The assumption underlying her suggestions was that our current home was inadequate for Jeremy's future status and needed renovation to meet the standards of his expected social circle. She couldn't comprehend that we might be satisfied with our current surroundings or that our modest lifestyle was a deliberate choice rather than a limitation to be overcome. Jeremy's graduation from Whitman University in May was a celebration that highlighted how much distance had grown between his values and ours. The graduation weekend included events at exclusive venues that clearly separated families based on wealth and social status. Jeremy guided us through these events while carefully managing our interactions with his classmates and their families, obviously concerned about how our modest appearance might reflect on his own social positioning. "These are my parents, Thomas and Victoria Ashford," Jeremy would say when introducing us to other families with a tone that seemed apologetic rather than proud. My father owns an electrical contracting business back home. His description of Thomas's work was technically accurate but delivered in a way that suggested limitation rather than accomplishment. After graduation, Jeremy accepted a position with Sterling and Associates, a prestigious investment banking firm in Manhattan, with a starting salary that exceeded most people's expectations for experienced professionals. His excitement about the opportunity was infectious, but his plans for his new lifestyle revealed how completely he'd embraced the culture of conspicuous consumption and status display. Jeremy and Natasha moved into an expensive Manhattan apartment that required Jeremy to spend nearly 60% of his substantial salary on rent and living expenses. Their social life revolved around expensive restaurants, exclusive events, and weekend trips to fashionable destinations that served primarily as opportunities for social media documentation and networking with other young professionals from privileged backgrounds. You have to understand the investment banking culture, Jeremy explained during one of his phone calls home during his first year at Sterling and Associates. Success isn't just about job performance, it's about fitting into the social and professional environment. The apartment Natasha and I chose isn't just housing, it's part of my professional presentation. The restaurants we frequent, the events we attend, the vacation destinations we choose, all of these decisions affect how colleagues and clients perceive my credibility and potential. Thomas and I found ourselves increasingly disconnected from Jeremy's new life and the values that drove his decision. His conversations focused almost exclusively on financial achievements, social events, and acquisition of status symbols that seemed to provide temporary satisfaction before requiring upgrade to even more expensive alternatives. When Jeremy and Natasha announced their engagement during Thanksgiving of his second year at Sterling and Associates, the wedding planning process revealed the full extent of their commitment to social display and status competition. Natasha had specific visions for their ceremony that involved exclusive venues, design arrangements, and guest lists carefully curated to include people who could enhance Jeremy's professional networking opportunity. We're planning the wedding for next September at the Rosewood Country Club, Jeremy announced during our Thanksgiving dinner. It's the same venue where the Pemberton family has held major celebrations for 3 generations. Natasha's father has connections there that will make everything much easier to arrange. The estimated cost for their wedding exceeded $150,000, not including the honeymoon trip to Europe that Natasha considered essential for their social media presence and cultural sophistication. Jeremy presented these expenses as investments in their future rather than excessive spending on a single event. "Dad, I know this seems expensive, but you have to consider the long-term implications," Jeremy explained when Thomas questioned the wedding budget. The guest list includes partners from major law firms, executives from Fortune 500 companies, and political figures who could influence business opportunities for decades. This isn't just a wedding, it's the foundation for network relationships that could affect my entire career. Jeremy's assumption was that Thomas and I would be honored to contribute significantly to their wedding expenses, viewing our participation as an investment in Jeremy's continued success rather than financial support for a celebration that reflected values we didn't share. When we suggested a more modest ceremony that focused on family and friends rather than professional networking, Jeremy and Natasha seemed genuinely confused by our perspective. "Mom, Natasha and I aren't just planning a wedding," Jeremy said with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow to understand. "We're establishing ourselves as a couple within social and professional networks that will influence our entire future. The connections we make at our wedding, the impression we create with our celebration, the precedent we set for how we approach major life events. All of these factors will affect how people perceive and interact with us for years to come." The wedding planning process became a source of ongoing tension as Jeremy and Natasha's expectations escalated beyond what Thomas and I considered reasonable, not because of financial constraints but because of fundamental disagreements about priorities and value. Their approach to marriage seemed to focus more on social positioning than on building a life together based on shared principles and mutual support. The first year of Jeremy and Natasha's marriage revealed the unsustainable nature of their lifestyle choices and the growing resentment they harbored toward what they perceived as their family's inadequate financial support. Despite Jeremy's substantial investment banking salary and Natasha's income from her interior design consulting practice, their expenses consistently exceeded their earnings by significant margins. Their Manhattan apartment, luxury car payments, designer clothing, exclusive dining, and constant travel created a financial pressure that they seemed unable or unwilling to address through spending reduction. Jeremy's phone calls home during this period became increasingly uncomfortable as he began making subtle and not-so-subtle requests for financial assistance. His approach was sophisticated, framing these requests as investment opportunities or family collaboration rather than admissions of financial difficulty. He would describe expensive purchases or experiences as necessities for his career advancement, implying that our financial support would benefit his long-term earning potential and, by extension, our family's overall success. Dad, Natasha and I are looking at purchasing a summer house in the Hamptons, Jeremy mentioned during a Sunday phone call in March. It's not just a vacation property, it's a strategic asset for client entertainment and professional network. Several partners at Sterling and Associates have mentioned that having a place in the Hamptons demonstrates commitment to the lifestyle that clients expect from their financial advisor. The Hamptons property Jeremy described carried a price tag of $1.2 million, requiring a down payment of $240,000 plus closing costs and immediate renovations that Natasha deemed essential for proper entertainment. Jeremy's presentation of this purchase as a business necessity rather than a luxury acquisition revealed how completely he'd rationalized his spending patterns and expectations for family financial support. "We're not asking for a gift," Jeremy continued, his tone suggesting that he was offering us a generous business proposition. "This could be structured as a family investment where you provide the down payment and we handle the monthly payment. When the property appreciates, and Hampton's real estate always appreciates, we could sell it and return your initial investment, plus a reasonable profit." Thomas and I listened to these proposals with increasing amazement at Jeremy's ability to reframe personal desires as family business opportunities. His assumption that we would be eager to invest in his lifestyle maintenance revealed how little he understood about our actual financial situation or our values regarding money and family relationships. Natasha's approach to financial pressure was more direct and considerably more manipulative than Jeremy's sophisticated presentation. During their visits to Riverside Falls, she would make pointed comments about the differences between her family's generosity and our apparent reluctance to support Jeremy's career advance. Her observations were delivered with sweet smiles and concerned tones that made her criticism difficult to address directly. "Jeremy is doing so well at Sterling and Associates," Natasha mentioned during Easter dinner at our house. "It's wonderful that he's positioned for such success, though I sometimes worry that he's having to work harder than necessary because he doesn't have the same family financial support that many of his colleagues enjoy." The Worthington family just bought their son a co-op in Tribeca as a wedding gift. The Ashworth parents provide a monthly allowance that covers their son's entertainment and travel expenses. Her comparisons were designed to shame us into providing similar support while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. Natasha had perfected the art of delivering criticism through apparent concern, making it difficult to respond without seeming defensive or unreasonable. The summer before their second wedding anniversary, Jeremy and Natasha's financial difficulties became more serious and their requests for assistance more desperate. Jeremy's performance at Sterling and Associates had been adequate but not exceptional, limiting his bonus potential and making their expensive lifestyle increasingly unsustainable. Natasha's interior design business was struggling to attract the high-end clients she needed to justify her pricing structure. "Mom, I need to discuss something serious with you and Dad," Jeremy said during a phone call in August, his usual confidence replaced by obvious stress. "Natasha and I are facing some cash flow challenges that could affect my career if we don't address them quickly. We've fallen behind on several credit card payments and our apartment management company is threatening eviction proceedings if we don't catch up on rent." The revelation that Jeremy and Natasha were facing eviction from their expensive Manhattan apartment was shocking.
not because of the financial crisis itself, but because of how completely they'd hidden their deteriorating situation behind continued displays of wealth and success. Their social media posts still featured expensive restaurants, designer purchases, and luxury travel experiences, creating an illusion of prosperity that masked serious financial distress. "We need approximately $75,000 to resolve our immediate obligations and get back on solid financial footing," Jeremy continued, his voice tight with embarrassment and desperation. "I know it's a significant amount, but this is really an investment in preventing a financial crisis that could derail everything I've worked toward. If word gets out at Sterling and Associates that I'm having personal financial difficulties, it could seriously damage my career prospects." Jeremy's request for $75,000 was presented as an emergency loan with specific repayment terms and interest rate, but his explanation of their financial situation revealed spending patterns that made repayment unlikely, without dramatic lifestyle changes that neither he nor Natasha seemed willing to consider. Their monthly expenses exceeded their combined income by nearly $8,000, creating a deficit that could only be sustained through continuous borrowing or family financial support. "Thomas and I found ourselves in an impossible position. We had the financial resources to resolve Jeremy's immediate crisis, but doing so would enable continued irresponsible spending and reinforce their belief that family financial support was available whenever their lifestyle choices created difficulty. More problematically, providing the assistance Jeremy requested would require revealing the extent of our savings and investments, something we'd avoided throughout his childhood and adult life." "Son, $75,000 is a substantial amount of money for any family," Thomas said carefully during our phone conversation. "Before we could consider such a significant loan, we'd need to understand exactly how you and Natasha plan to prevent similar situations in the future. Your current spending patterns seem unsustainable regardless of any financial assistance we might provide." Jeremy's response revealed how little respect he had for our financial wisdom and how completely he'd embraced the debt-financed lifestyle that characterized his social and professional environment. "Dad, you don't understand the investment banking industry or the financial requirements for success at this level," he said with barely concealed irritation. "The expenses you consider excessive are actually necessary investments in my career development and professional position." When we suggested that Jeremy and Natasha might need to reduce their expenses rather than increase their borrowing, both of them reacted with genuine incomprehension. The idea that they should adjust their lifestyle to match their income seemed foreign to their understanding of how successful people managed their finances. "Mom, moving to a cheaper apartment or reducing our entertainment budget would send exactly the wrong message to colleagues and clients," Natasha explained during a follow-up phone call. "People in our professional circle judge competence based on lifestyle indicators. If we appear to be struggling financially, it undermines confidence in Jeremy's ability to manage client investments and financial planning." Their logic was circular and self-defeating. They needed to maintain expensive lifestyles to appear successful, but maintaining those lifestyles required continuous borrowing that created actual financial instability. Jeremy and Natasha seemed trapped in a cycle of spending that they couldn't escape without admitting that their approach to money management was fundamentally flawed. As autumn approached and their financial crisis deepened, Jeremy and Natasha's attitude toward our family became increasingly hostile and resentful. They began making comparisons between our reluctance to provide assistance and Natasha's family's more generous approach to supporting their children's lifestyle choices. Their visits to Riverside Falls became uncomfortable experiences filled with passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty and financial priority. The Pemberton family understands that investing in children's success creates long-term benefits for everyone, Natasha mentioned during their October visit. Natasha's parents view their financial support as family wealth management rather than individual expense. They recognize that helping their children maintain appropriate lifestyles ultimately strengthens the entire family's social and financial position. Jeremy and Natasha had apparently convinced themselves that our modest lifestyle and reluctance to fund their excessive spending represented selfishness rather than principled financial management. Their inability to understand our perspective, combined with their desperate need for financial rescue, was creating a family crisis that would soon force us to confront fundamental questions about money, values, and family relationships. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving weekend when Jeremy and Natasha arrived at our Riverside Falls home, driving a brand new Porsche Cayenne, despite having claimed severe financial distress just weeks earlier. Thomas and I watched from our living room window as they parked the luxury SUV in our modest driveway, the vehicle's pristine silver finish and temporary dealer plates creating a stark contrast with our practical neighborhood setting. "Did they buy a new car?" Thomas asked quietly, his voice mixing confusion with concern. "I thought they were facing eviction and needed emergency financial assistance." Jeremy's explanation for the Porsche purchase revealed the depth of his financial delusion and his complete inability to distinguish between wants and needs. The lease on Natasha's BMW was expiring, and her father arranged a deal through one of his business connections, Jeremy explained casually while unloading expensive luggage from the vehicle's spacious cargo area. "Pemberton knows the owner of the Porsche dealership personally, so we got financing terms that were too good to pass up." The casual mention of financing terms while requesting emergency family loans was stunning in its audacity. Jeremy seemed genuinely unable to understand why purchasing an expensive luxury vehicle might conflict with his claims of financial crisis and desperate need for family assistance. His ability to rationalize contradictory financial decisions had apparently reached levels that bordered on delusional thinking. Natasha's contribution to the explanation was even more revealing. Jeremy's career requires a certain image, and arriving at client meetings in an older vehicle was beginning to affect his professional credibility, she said while examining our modest living room with her usual mixture of politeness and barely concealed disdain. "The Porsche lease payments are actually lower than what we were paying for the BMW, so it's really a cost-saving measure when you consider the long-term financial implications." Thomas and I exchanged glances that communicated our shared amazement at their ability to frame luxury purchases as financial necessity. The idea that a Porsche lease could be described as cost-saving while simultaneously requesting $75,000 in emergency family loans demonstrated a level of cognitive dissonance that seemed almost pathological. During dinner conversation that evening, Jeremy's casual mentions of recent expensive purchases created an increasingly surreal atmosphere, as he continued to maintain that he and Natasha were experiencing serious financial difficulty. He described a $15,000 vacation to the French Riviera as a business networking opportunity, a $8,000 designer handbag purchase as professional wardrobe investment, and a $12,000 wine collection acquisition as entertaining assets for client development. "You have to understand the investment banking culture," Jeremy explained when Thomas questioned the logic of expensive purchases during financial crisis. "Success in this industry requires maintaining credibility through lifestyle demonstration. Clients won't trust their investments to advisors who appear to be struggling financially themselves. Everything Natasha and I purchase serves a dual purpose: personal enjoyment and professional positioning." The conversation became even more uncomfortable when Natasha began comparing our Thanksgiving dinner unfavorably to the elaborate celebrations her family hosted at their Connecticut estate. Her descriptions of the Pemberton family's holiday traditions focused heavily on expensive catering, premium wine selections, and guest lists that included prominent business and political figures. "The Pemberton family Thanksgiving typically includes 40 to 50 guests," Natasha explained while picking at the homemade meal Thomas and I had prepared with traditional family recipes. "Pemberton views holiday entertaining as essential relationship maintenance with clients, colleagues, and community leaders. Their guest list reads like a who's who of New England business and political influence." Her implied criticism of our modest family celebration was clear, though delivered with her characteristic sweet tone that made direct response difficult. Jeremy nodded along with her observations, apparently agreeing that our traditional approach to holiday celebration was inadequate compared to the Pemberton family's networking-focused event. The weekend's most revealing moment came when Jeremy received a phone call from someone at Sterling & Associates regarding what appeared to be serious workplace difficulty. We couldn't hear the details of the conversation, but Jeremy's responses suggested that his job performance was being questioned and his position at the firm might be in jeopardy. "I understand the concerns about my client portfolio management," Jeremy said into his phone while pacing nervously around our backyard. Yes, I'm aware that my numbers have been below expectations for the past 2 quarters. No, I don't think my personal circumstances are affecting my professional performance.
After ending the call, Jeremy seemed shaken and distracted, though he attempted to dismiss the conversation as routine workplace discussion. However, his demeanor for the remainder of the weekend suggested that his career difficulties were more serious than he was willing to admit, even to himself. Natasha's reaction to Jeremy's apparent workplace problems was to intensify her criticism of our family's financial priorities and our reluctance to provide the level of support she considered appropriate for Jeremy's career development. She began making increasingly direct statements about family loyalty and financial responsibility that revealed her complete inability to understand our perspective. "I just don't understand how families can watch their children struggle when they have the ability to help," Natasha said during a private conversation with me while Jeremy was outside, taking another work-related phone call. The Pemberton family would never allow any family member to face professional difficulties that could be resolved through financial support. They understand that family wealth should be leveraged to create opportunities for the next generation. Her assumption that we were watching Jeremy's struggle while having the ability to help was based on her complete misunderstanding of both our financial situation and our values regarding money and character development. Natasha seemed genuinely convinced that our reluctance to fund Jeremy's lifestyle represented selfishness rather than principled approach to family financial relationship. The weekend concluded with Jeremy making another desperate request for financial assistance, this time framing it as a last resort to prevent professional catastrophe. His presentation was more emotional and less sophisticated than previous requests, suggesting that his situation had deteriorated significantly since our last conversation. "Mom, Dad, I need to be completely honest with you about my situation," Jeremy said during Sunday evening conversation before their departure. "My position at Sterling & Associates is in serious jeopardy. My performance reviews have been poor, and there's talk about reassigning my client portfolio. If I lose this job, everything Natasha and I have worked toward will collapse." Jeremy's admission that his career was failing despite his expensive lifestyle and networking investments was the first crack in the facade he'd maintained throughout his adult life. His request for assistance was no longer about funding luxury purchases or maintaining social status. It was about preventing complete financial and professional collapse. "I know I've asked for help before, and I understand your concerns about our spending patterns," Jeremy continued, his voice carrying genuine desperation. "But this is different. This is about survival, not lifestyle enhancement. If you can help us one more time, I promise we'll make the changes necessary to ensure this never happens again." The plea was heartfelt and appeared sincere, but Jeremy's track record of promises and explanations made it difficult to distinguish between genuine crisis and continued manipulation. Thomas and I found ourselves facing a decision that would require us to choose between enabling Jeremy's continued irresponsible behavior and allowing him to face the consequences of his financial choices. That night, after Jeremy and Natasha had returned to Manhattan in their expensive Porsches, Thomas and I had the most serious conversation about family finances and values that we'd shared in decades. Jeremy's situation forced us to confront questions about parental responsibility, financial assistance, and the difference between helping and enabling that we'd never expected to face with our own son. More importantly, Jeremy's desperate situation and complete inability to understand our perspective convinced us that the time for maintaining our financial privacy might be ending. His crisis was about to force revelations that would fundamentally change our family relationships and challenge everything Jeremy thought he knew about money, success, and family dynamic. The catalyst for our family's dramatic confrontation came in the form of a certified letter that arrived at our Riverside Falls home on a cold December morning. The return address showed Willowbrook Estates Property Management, and the contents revealed that Jeremy and Natasha's dream house, the one they'd purchased 2 years earlier with such pride and excitement, was entering foreclosure proceedings due to missed mortgage payment. Thomas handed me the letter with a grave expression. "Victoria, this isn't addressed to us, it's marked for Jeremy Ashford at this address. Why would foreclosure notices for his house be coming to our home?" I examined the document carefully, recognizing the legal language and official formatting from my years of financial consulting work. The notice indicated that Jeremy and Natasha were 4 months behind on their mortgage payments, totaling $23,847 in overdue amounts, plus penalties and legal fees. More significantly, the letter referenced previous attempts to contact the borrowers at their primary residence that had been unsuccessful. They must have listed our address as their backup contact, I said. Though something about the situation felt more complex than simple forwarding arrangements. Jeremy's probably been avoiding these notices, hoping to resolve the situation before it reached legal proceeding. The foreclosure notice forced Thomas and me to confront a decision we'd been avoiding for months. Jeremy's financial crisis was no longer about luxury lifestyle maintenance or career positioning. It was about basic housing security and legal obligation. The disconnect between his continued expensive purchases and his inability to meet fundamental financial responsibilities had reached a point that demanded immediate intervention or catastrophic consequences. I contacted Rebecca Martinez, my longtime attorney who had handled our estate planning and business affairs for over 15 years. Rebecca was familiar with our financial situation and had helped structure our investments and property acquisitions to maintain privacy while maximizing long-term growth. Rebecca, I need you to research something confidential, I said during our phone conversation. My son Jeremy purchased a house in Willowbrook Estates 2 years ago. I need to know who currently holds his mortgage and whether there are any options for third-party intervention in foreclosure proceedings. Rebecca's research revealed information that was both shocking and perfectly logical given our family's financial history. Jeremy's original mortgage had been sold twice since his initial purchase, eventually ending up in the portfolio of Atlantic Financial Services, a company that specialized in purchasing and managing distressed residential loans from traditional banks. Victoria, here's something interesting, Rebecca said when she called back with her findings. Atlantic Financial Services is owned by Meridian Investment Group, which is the same firm that manages several of your real estate investment trusts. There might be more flexibility in this situation than typically exists in foreclosure proceedings. Rebecca's discovery opened possibilities that I hadn't considered. Through our existing business relationships and financial positioning, we might be able to address Jeremy's housing crisis in ways that would both resolve his immediate problem and reveal the true extent of our family's financial resources. Rebecca, I want you to explore the possibility of purchasing Jeremy's mortgage directly from Atlantic Financial Services, I said, making a decision that would fundamentally alter our family dynamic. Structure it as a standard investment acquisition, but I want complete control over the terms and payment arrangement. The mortgage purchase negotiations took 3 weeks to complete, involving legal documentation and financial transfers that demonstrated the substantial resources Thomas and I had accumulated over decades of careful investing and modest living. The total acquisition cost was $84,200, representing the outstanding loan balance, plus accrued penalties and legal fees. During this period, Jeremy's phone calls home became increasingly desperate as his foreclosure timeline approached and his efforts to secure emergency financing failed. His conversations revealed that he'd exhausted traditional lending options and was considering increasingly dangerous financial arrangements to avoid losing his house. Mom, I've found a private lender who's willing to provide bridge financing to stop the foreclosure, Jeremy said during a particularly stressful phone call in late December. The interest rate is higher than I'd prefer, but it's the only option available given our current credit situation. I just need a cosigner to guarantee the loan terms. Jeremy's request for co-signing high-interest private loans was the final confirmation that his financial situation had deteriorated beyond recovery through conventional means. His willingness to involve family members in dangerous lending arrangements demonstrated both his desperation and his continued inability to make responsible financial decisions. On January 3rd, I called Jeremy and asked him to meet me at Morrison's Coffee House, a quiet local establishment where we could have a private conversation without interruption. I chose the location carefully, wanting neutral ground where Jeremy would feel comfortable but where our discussion wouldn't be overheard by other family members or community members. Jeremy arrived looking haggard and anxious, clearly expecting another difficult conversation about family financial assistance and his deteriorating situation. He'd lost weight over the past month, and his usually meticulous appearance showed signs of stress and sleepless nights. "Mom, before you say anything, I want you to know that I understand how my request for help must sound," Jeremy began before I could speak. "I know my financial management hasn't been perfect, and I realize that asking for family assistance repeatedly isn't sustainable. But losing the house would be catastrophic for my career and my marriage. Everything Natasha and I have worked toward would collapse." I listened to Jeremy's familiar justifications and explanations, recognizing the desperation beneath his sophisticated language and business terminology. His fear was genuine, even if his understanding of the situation remained fundamentally flawed. "Jeremy, I need to tell you something that's going to change how you think about our family's financial situation," I said calmly, pulling a manila folder from my purse. "3 weeks ago I purchased your mortgage from Atlantic Financial Services. You no longer owe money to a bank or lending institution. You owe money to me." Jeremy's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally a mixture of relief and humiliation that was painful to witness. He stared at the legal documents I'd placed on the table between us, reading the mortgage transfer papers that showed his mother as the new loan holder. "I don't understand," Jeremy said quietly, his voice barely audible above the coffee shop's background noise. Where did you get $8,407,000 to buy my mortgage? I thought you and Dad were living on retirement savings and Dad's business income." His question revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven our family conflicts for years. Jeremy had constructed an entire narrative about our financial limitations based on our modest lifestyle, never considering that our living choices might reflect values, rather than constraints. "Jeremy, your father and I have been financially comfortable for many years," I explained gently. "We chose to live modestly because we believe that's the best way to build real security and maintain perspective about what's truly important. The money we didn't spend on expensive houses, luxury cars, and status symbols was invested in assets that have grown substantially over time." Jeremy's response to this revelation was complex and emotionally charged. Relief at resolving his housing crisis mixed with embarrassment about his financial mismanagement and anger about what he perceived as family deception during his years of struggle. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jeremy asked, his voice rising with emotion. "I've been desperately trying to manage impossible financial pressures while you were sitting on resources that could have prevented all of this stress and difficulty. How could you watch me struggle when you had the ability to help?" His reaction revealed the depth of his misunderstanding about money, family relationships, and personal responsibility. Jeremy seemed unable to distinguish between having financial resources and being obligated to prevent other people from experiencing the consequences of their choices. "Son, we watched you make choices that we couldn't support even though we had the resources to enable those choices," I replied carefully. "Helping you maintain an unsustainable lifestyle wouldn't have solved your problems, it would have postponed and probably worsened them." The conversation that followed lasted nearly 3 hours as Jeremy struggled to process the revelation about our financial situation and its implications for everything he thought he knew about our family dynamics and his own crisis. The days following my revelation to Jeremy brought a series of phone calls and discoveries that revealed the full extent of his and Natasha's financial deception, not just to our family but to themselves and their entire social circle. Jeremy's initial shock had given way to a desperate need to understand how his carefully constructed lifestyle had collapsed so completely, and his questions forced me to conduct a thorough investigation into their actual financial situation. Rebecca Martinez, working at my request, obtained comprehensive financial records that painted a devastating picture of Jeremy and Natasha's spending patterns and debt accumulation. The mortgage foreclosure was merely the most visible symptom of a financial crisis that encompassed every aspect of their lives. They owed $89,000 across 17 different credit cards, had taken cash advances totaling $34,000 from Jeremy's 401k retirement account,
and had borrowed $67,000 against Natasha's life insurance policy. Victoria, this is financial self-destruction on a scale I rarely see outside of gambling addiction cases. Rebecca explained during our meeting in her downtown office. Jeremy and Natasha have been using credit and borrowing to maintain consumption levels that exceed their income by approximately 60%. They've essentially been living in a financial house of cards that was destined to collapse. The documentation Rebecca had assembled revealed spending patterns that were both shocking and pathetic in their desperation to maintain appearances. Jeremy and Natasha had been paying for restaurant meals with cash advances from credit cards, funding vacation trips through borrowed money, and purchasing designer clothing through payment plans that carried interest rates exceeding 20%. More troubling was the discovery that they had been lying to their friends and colleagues about their financial situation with the same sophistication they'd used to deceive our family. Natasha had been telling her social circle that her family was funding their lifestyle, while Jeremy had been implying to his Sterling and Associates colleagues that he came from a wealthy family that provided ongoing financial support. They've created multiple fictional narratives about their financial resources. Rebecca continued, showing me social media posts and expense reports that documented their deception. Natasha posted photos from their French Riviera vacation with captions about family generosity and blessed to have such supportive parents. Jeremy submitted entertainment expenses to Sterling and Associates, claiming they were family-funded client development activity. The investigation also revealed that Jeremy's job performance problems at Sterling and Associates were directly related to his financial stress and the time he'd been spending managing his debt crisis, rather than focusing on client services. His supervisor had documented multiple instances of Jeremy being distracted during client meetings, missing important deadlines and making careless errors in financial analysis that had cost the firm potential business. Mr. Ashford's personal financial difficulties appear to be affecting his professional judgment, read one performance evaluation that Rebecca had obtained through her legal network. His recent client recommendations have been increasingly aggressive and poorly researched, suggesting that his personal need for commission income may be influencing his professional advice. Jeremy's phone call to me 3 days after our coffee shop meeting revealed how completely the revelation of our financial situation had shattered his understanding of his own circumstances. His voice carried a mixture of panic and confusion that was painful to hear, even given his years of disrespectful behavior toward our family. "Mom, I've been looking at all of our finances and I don't understand how this happened," Jeremy said, his usual confidence replaced by genuine bewilderment. "Natasha and I both have good incomes. We're not stupid people. How did we accumulate this much debt without realizing how serious the situation had become?" His question revealed the fundamental problem with his approach to money management. Jeremy and Natasha had been focused entirely on maintaining their lifestyle without tracking the cumulative cost of their choices. They'd treated credit cards, loans, and advances as temporary solutions, rather than recognizing them as symptoms of unsustainable spending patterns. During this conversation, Jeremy made an admission that helped explain his years of financial recklessness and his resentment toward our family's modest lifestyle. "I thought success meant never having to worry about money," he said quietly. "I thought that if I earned enough and positioned myself correctly, I could spend whatever I wanted without consequences. I never learned how to manage money, I just learned how to acquire it." This confession revealed the gap in Jeremy's education that all of his prestigious schooling and professional training had failed to address. He understood complex financial instruments and investment strategies for managing other people's money, but he'd never learned basic personal financial management, or developed the discipline necessary for living within his means. Natasha's reaction to the revelation about our family's financial resources was more complex and considerably more disturbing than Jeremy's shocked acceptance. When Jeremy told her about my mortgage purchase and our hidden wealth, she became angry rather than grateful, viewing our years of financial privacy as a deliberate betrayal rather than a principled choice. "Your mother has been lying to us for years," Natasha told Jeremy during a phone call that he shared with me afterward. "She's been watching us struggle and stress and make desperate financial decisions, while sitting on resources that could have prevented all of this suffering. How can you not see that as cruel and manipulative?" Natasha's interpretation of our financial privacy revealed her complete inability to understand the difference between having resources and being obligated to prevent other people from experiencing consequences. Her anger suggested that she viewed our wealth as family property that should have been available to support her lifestyle choices, rather than as assets that we'd earned through decades of careful management. The most shocking discovery came when Rebecca's investigation revealed that Jeremy and Natasha had been in preliminary discussions with bankruptcy attorneys for over 6 months, while continuing to make expensive purchases and request family financial assistance. They had been preparing for complete financial collapse, while simultaneously maintaining the fiction that their situation was temporary and manageable. They consulted with 3 different bankruptcy attorneys between August and November, Rebecca reported. The attorneys all advised them that their debt levels were unsustainable and that they needed to either dramatically reduce their expenses or prepare for Chapter 7 proceedings. Instead of following this advice, they continued spending and apparently decided to pursue family financial assistance as an alternative to bankruptcy. This revelation fundamentally changed my understanding of Jeremy and Natasha's behavior during their recent visits and phone calls. Their desperate requests for assistance hadn't been motivated by temporary financial difficulties. They'd been part of a calculated attempt to avoid the legal consequences of their systematic financial mismanagement. Thomas's reaction to these discoveries was more emotional than mine, reflecting his deeper hurt at Jeremy's willingness to deceive and manipulate family relationships for financial gain. "Victoria, our son has been lying to us about everything," he said after reviewing Rebecca's documentation. "Not just about his spending or his debt, but about his fundamental approach to family relationships and personal responsibility." The investigation also revealed that Jeremy's problems at Sterling and Associates were more serious than he'd admitted to. His supervisor had placed him on formal probation with specific performance requirements that needed to be met within 60 days to avoid termination. Jeremy's financial stress had been affecting his work quality to such an extent that client complaints had been filed regarding his distracted behavior and poor advice. Most significantly, Rebecca's research uncovered evidence that Jeremy had been using his position at Sterling and Associates to seek personal financial advice and lending options that violated the firm's conflict of interest policy. He'd been approaching wealthy clients about private investment opportunities that would have benefited his personal finances, while potentially compromising his professional obligations.
Jeremy has been walking a very dangerous line between personal financial desperation and professional ethics violations. Rebecca warned during our final meeting about the investigation. If Sterling and Associates discovers the extent of his personal financial problems and his attempts to leverage client relationships for personal benefit, termination would be the least of his concerns. He could face regulatory sanctions that would prevent him from working in financial services permanently. As January concluded and February began, the full scope of Jeremy and Natasha's financial catastrophe became clear. They weren't facing temporary difficulties that could be resolved through family assistance or lifestyle adjustments. They'd created a financial disaster that required complete restructuring of their approach to money, work, and family relationships. The revelation of our hidden wealth had solved their immediate housing crisis by transferring Jeremy's mortgage to family ownership, but it had also exposed the fundamental dishonesty and irresponsibility that characterized their entire approach to financial management. The question facing our family was no longer whether we could help Jeremy and Natasha, but whether they were capable of the dramatic personal changes necessary to rebuild their lives on sustainable foundations. The confrontation I'd been preparing for came in early February when Jeremy and Natasha arrived at our Riverside Falls home for what they assumed would be a family meeting about restructuring their financial obligations and establishing new payment arrangements for the mortgage I now own. They entered our modest living room with the expectant air of people who believed they were about to negotiate favorable terms with family members who had finally revealed their ability to provide meaningful assistance. Natasha carried a leather portfolio filled with what appeared to be carefully prepared financial projections and repayment proposals, while Jeremy held a manila folder containing documentation that he'd obviously organized to support their case for lenient family lending terms. Their preparation was thorough and professional, suggesting they'd approached this meeting as a business negotiation rather than a family conversation about accountability and consequence. "Mom, Dad, Natasha and I want to start by expressing our gratitude for your intervention in our mortgage situation. Jeremy began with the polished confidence of someone delivering a rehearsed presentation. We know that purchasing our loan represented a significant financial commitment, and we want to discuss repayment terms that work for everyone while allowing us to rebuild our credit and stabilize our situation. Thomas and I exchanged glances across our kitchen table, both recognizing that Jeremy still fundamentally misunderstood the nature of our family crisis and the changes that would be required for any meaningful resolution. His businesslike approach to the conversation suggested that he viewed our mortgage purchase as an investment opportunity rather than an emergency intervention designed to prevent his complete financial collapse. Before we discuss repayment terms, I said carefully, we need to address the broader issues that created this crisis. The mortgage foreclosure was a symptom of much larger problems that can't be resolved through renegotiated payment schedules alone. Jeremy's confident expression began to falter as I outlined the comprehensive investigation Rebecca had conducted into their financial situation. His face showed increasing alarm as I described the credit card debt, retirement account loans, insurance policy borrowing, and the pattern of deception they'd maintained with family, friends, and colleagues about their actual circumstance. Son, you and Natasha have been living a financial lie for years, Thomas said with quiet firmness. This isn't about temporary cash flow problems or career positioning expenses. This is about fundamental dishonesty and irresponsibility that's affected every relationship in your life. Natasha's reaction to our presentation was immediate and defensive. Jeremy and I made some mistakes with our spending, but that doesn't justify the way your family has handled this situation, she said with rising anger. You've been deceiving us about your financial resources while watching us struggle with problems you could have prevented. Her response revealed the depth of her entitlement and her complete inability to accept responsibility for the consequences of their choices. Natasha seemed genuinely convinced that our failure to prevent their financial crisis was more problematic than their systematic dishonesty and irresponsible spending. Natasha, our financial resources don't create an obligation to enable your irresponsible choices, I replied directly. Helping you maintain an unsustainable lifestyle would have made your problems worse, not better. The conversation became increasingly tense as Jeremy and Natasha realized that we weren't prepared to simply restructure their debt and resume their previous lifestyle with family financial backing. Their carefully prepared proposals and projections were relevant to our actual concerns about their character, values, and fundamental approach to money and relationships. What exactly are you expecting from us? Jeremy asked with obvious frustration when it became clear that we weren't interested in his repayment proposals. We've acknowledged our mistakes, and we're prepared to make changes. What more do you want? His question revealed that he still viewed the situation as a negotiation rather than a moment of accountability that required genuine transformation rather than superficial adjustment. Jeremy seemed to believe that acknowledging mistakes was sufficient to restore family relationships and secure continued financial support. Jeremy, we expect you to rebuild your life based on honesty, responsibility, and realistic financial management. Thomas answered. That means living within your actual income, ending the deception and manipulation, and demonstrating that you understand the difference between wants and needs. The specific terms we outlined for Jeremy's mortgage repayment reflected our determination to use this crisis as an opportunity for genuine character development, rather than simple financial resolution. Jeremy would pay rent equivalent to a modest apartment in his area rather than luxury housing costs, with the understanding that any lifestyle expenses beyond basic necessities would need to be funded through dramatic changes to his spending pattern. You're asking us to give up everything we've worked toward, Natasha protested when we explained that their current lifestyle was completely unsustainable regardless of family financial assistance. Our social connections, our professional positioning, our community involvement, all of that requires maintaining certain standards that you're making impossible. Her protest perfectly captured the fundamental problem with their approach to success and relationship. Natasha couldn't distinguish between genuine accomplishment and purchased appearances, between real social connections and transactional networking relationships. If your social connections and professional positioning require continuous financial deception and family subsidies, then they aren't real accomplishments, I responded. They're expensive performances that have led to the crisis you're facing now. The most dramatic moment of the confrontation came when Jeremy attempted to turn the conversation back to our family's financial privacy and what he characterized as our deception about our resources. His accusation that we'd been dishonest revealed how completely he'd missed the point of our modest lifestyle and our values about money and character. "Mom, you can't lecture us about honesty when you've been hiding your wealth for years," Jeremy said with obvious anger. "You've been lying about your financial situation while judging our choices and refusing to help when you had the resources to make a difference." Thomas's response to Jeremy's accusation was more emotional than anything I'd heard from him throughout this entire crisis. "Son, we weren't hiding our wealth, we were demonstrating our values," he said with quiet intensity. "We chose to live modestly because we believe that's how you build real security and maintain perspective about what matters. You chose to live beyond your means because you believe appearances are more important than reality." The contrast Thomas outlined between our family's approach to money and Jeremy's philosophy crystallized the fundamental difference in values that had created our crisis. We had accumulated wealth through living below our means and making careful choices. Jeremy had accumulated debt through living beyond his means and making impulsive decisions. Jeremy's job situation at Sterling and Associates reached its inevitable conclusion 2 weeks after our family confrontation when he was terminated for performance issues and potential ethics violations related to his personal financial problems. His supervisor's final evaluation cited ongoing personal financial stress that has compromised professional judgment and created conflicts of interest with client relationships. The termination was devastating for Jeremy, not just financially but psychologically, as it represented the collapse of the career identity he'd spent years building and the professional networks he'd counted on for future opportunity. More importantly, his termination in the financial services industry would make finding comparable employment extremely difficult, potentially forcing him to rebuild his career in different fields with lower income potential. "Dad, I don't know what I'm going to do," Jeremy said during a phone call after losing his job. "Everything I worked toward, all the education and positioning and networking, it's all gone. I don't know how to start over at my age without the income I was counting on." His despair was genuine and heartbreaking, representing the first time since childhood that Jeremy had faced genuine uncertainty about his future without the safety net of family financial resources or professional credentials to cushion his difficulty. Thomas and I made the decision to offer Jeremy employment with his father's electrical contracting business, not as a gesture of charity but as an opportunity for him to learn practical skills, understand the value of honest work, and rebuild his character through meaningful contribution rather than financial manipulation. "Son, this isn't about giving you a job," Thomas explained during the conversation where he made the offer. "This is about giving you a chance to remember what real work feels like, and to rebuild your life based on genuine accomplishment, rather than borrowed money and purchased appearance." Jeremy's acceptance of the position represented the first step toward genuine transformation rather than continued performance. Working alongside his father and learning the electrical trade would provide him with practical skills, honest income, and the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with meaningful work and authentic achievement. The transformation that followed Jeremy's acceptance of honest work was gradual but profound, revealing layers of character that had been buried beneath years of financial performance and social position. His first months working alongside Thomas in the electrical contracting business were humbling experiences that forced him to confront the difference between intellectual knowledge and practical skill, between theoretical understanding and hands-on competence. Jeremy's initial days on job sites were marked by mistakes, frustration, and the physical exhaustion of someone unaccustomed to manual labor. His soft hands developed calluses, his designer clothing was replaced with practical work gear, and his carefully maintained appearance gave way to the honest fatigue of someone learning a skilled trade through actual effort rather than academic study. "Dad, I never realized how much skill and knowledge went into electrical work," Jeremy admitted during a lunch break at a residential rewiring project in March. "I spent years learning complex financial theories, but I couldn't figure out how to properly strip wire or read a circuit diagram. This work requires a completely different kind of intelligence than anything I learned in school."
Thomas's response reflected both patience and satisfaction at seeing his son develop appreciation for practical skills and honest work. "Son, every type of work has its own dignity and challenges," he said while showing Jeremy how to properly install electrical outlet. "The difference is that when you finish an electrical job, you've created something useful that will serve people for decades. When you finished those financial transactions, what exactly had you built?" Jeremy's question about the lasting value of his previous work revealed how completely his perspective on success and contribution had shifted. His investment banking career, which had once seemed like the pinnacle of professional achievement, now appeared to have been largely about moving money between accounts, rather than creating anything of lasting value or genuine benefit to community. Natasha's adjustment to their dramatically changed circumstances was more difficult and ultimately led to the end of their marriage. Her inability to adapt to modest living and her continued resentment about the family's financial boundaries created ongoing conflicts that Jeremy was no longer willing to accommodate through borrowed money and lifestyle deception. "Jeremy's completely changed," Natasha complained to mutual friends during their separation proceedings. "He's become obsessed with this blue-collar work and doesn't care about maintaining the social connections and professional networks we spent years building. It's like he's given up on success and chosen to live like his parents." Her characterization of Jeremy's transformation as giving up on success perfectly captured her inability to understand the difference between genuine accomplishment and purchased appearance. Natasha couldn't comprehend that Jeremy's choice to rebuild his life based on honest work and authentic relationships represented growth rather than retreat. The divorce proceedings revealed the full extent of their shared financial irresponsibility and Natasha's continued commitment to lifestyle expenses that bore no relationship to actual income. She fought for alimony payments that would have allowed her to maintain their previous standard of living, apparently believing that marriage entitled her to permanent funding for expensive tastes, regardless of economic reality. Natasha's attorney is arguing that Jeremy has an obligation to maintain her lifestyle at pre-separation levels, Rebecca Martinez explained during one of our legal consultations. They're claiming that his decision to change careers represents deliberate income reduction designed to avoid financial responsibility for their shared debts and commitments. Jeremy's response to these legal pressures demonstrated how fundamentally his priorities had shifted. Rather than attempting to maintain appearances or preserve relationships based on financial transactions, he chose to accept the consequences of their shared financial decisions and focus on building a sustainable future based on realistic income and responsible spending. "Mom, I know the divorce is going to be expensive, and I know Natasha's going to get a significant settlement," Jeremy said during one of our family dinners that spring. "But I'd rather start over with nothing than continue trying to maintain a lifestyle that was destroying my character and my relationships with people who actually care about me." His willingness to accept financial consequences rather than manipulate family resources or legal proceedings marked a complete reversal from the entitled, demanding person he'd been during his years of financial crisis. Jeremy had apparently learned that integrity was more valuable than money and that authentic relationships were more satisfying than transactional network. By summer, Jeremy's competence as an electrician had improved dramatically and his relationship with Thomas had evolved into a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Watching them work together on complex commercial projects, I could see the satisfaction both men derived from solving problems, serving customers, and building something meaningful through their combined skill. "Jeremy's becoming a really skilled tradesman," Thomas told me one evening after they'd completed a challenging electrical upgrade at a local medical facility. "But more importantly, he's remembering what it feels like to be proud of work that actually helps people." His attitude toward everything, money, relationships, success, has completely changed. The most significant measure of Jeremy's transformation was his approach to our family's financial dynamics and his own relationship with money. Instead of viewing our wealth as a resource to be accessed for lifestyle enhancement, he began demonstrating genuine interest in understanding how we'd accumulated our assets through decades of careful decision-making and modest living. "Mom, I want to learn how you and Dad built financial security while living so modestly," Jeremy said during a conversation about long-term planning. "I spent years trying to appear wealthy while accumulating debt, but you actually became wealthy while appearing modest." I need to understand how that discipline works and how to develop it myself. His request for education rather than financial assistance represented a fundamental shift in how he understood the relationship between money and family. Jeremy was no longer seeking to extract resources from our family wealth. He was seeking to learn the principles that had created that wealth in the first place. Thomas and I began sharing our investment strategies, spending philosophies, and long-term planning approaches with Jeremy, treating him as an adult student rather than a dependent child seeking financial rescue. These conversations became opportunities to rebuild our relationship based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the conflict and disappointment that had characterized our interactions for years. The goal isn't to accumulate money for its own sake, I explained during one of our financial education sessions. The goal is to create security and independence that allows you to make choices based on your values, rather than your financial pressure. When you're not worried about paying bills or maintaining appearances, you can focus on contributing to things that actually matter. Jeremy's application of these lessons was evident in his approach to rebuilding his personal finance. Instead of seeking shortcuts or dramatic solutions, he embraced the slow process of paying down debt, living within his means, and gradually building savings through consistent effort rather than complex schemes. 18 months after beginning work with Thomas's electrical contracting business, Jeremy had paid off his credit card debt, established an emergency fund, and begun contributing to retirement savings for the first time since his Sterling and Associates. His progress was steady rather than spectacular, but it was sustainable and based on genuine income rather than borrowed money. Dad, I understand now why you and Mom chose to live modestly even when you could afford more, Jeremy said during our Christmas dinner that year. When you're not worried about impressing other people or maintaining expensive appearances, you can focus on building real security and meaningful relationships. I spent years being stressed about money despite earning a lot of it, but now I feel financially secure despite earning much less. The garage where Jeremy had once relegated me to sleep had been converted into a workshop where he and Thomas tested electrical equipment and planned complex projects. The transformation of that space from a symbol of disrespect into a place of collaboration and learning seemed emblematic of our family's overall journey from conflict to reconciliation. Jeremy's relationship with money, work, and family had been fundamentally rebuilt through the crisis that began with my sleeping on that garage futon. The son who had once viewed our modest lifestyle as limitation had learned to see it as wisdom, and the family relationships that had been damaged by financial deception had been restored through honesty, accountability, and genuine transformation. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that the most valuable lesson wasn't about money or family dynamics. It was about the difference between helping and enabling, between supporting someone's growth and preventing their necessary learning. Jeremy's crisis had forced all of us to confront difficult truths about values, character, and the relationship between wealth and wisdom. The mortgage I'd purchased to prevent Jeremy's foreclosure was eventually transferred back to him at favorable terms once he'd demonstrated sustained financial responsibility and genuine character growth. But the real resolution wasn't financial, it was the restoration of family relationships, based on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that true security comes from character rather than credit limit. Our family had emerged from the crisis stronger and more honest than we'd been in years, with relationships based on authentic connection rather than financial dependency or social performance. Jeremy had learned that genuine success couldn't be borrowed or purchased. It had to be earned through patient effort, responsible choices, and the courage to live according to principles rather than appearances. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.